Welcome to the Wounded Leadership Podcast, Stories from the Wounded. I'm your host, Dr. Matthew Tanner, the founder of Wounded Leadership Ministries. You know, the calling to shepherd God's church brings some of life's greatest joys and adventures. Yet this calling also comes with profound challenges. Many church leaders face those challenges in silence. Nearly every pastor will experience the pain of unjustified termination or forced resignation at least once in their ministry journey. On this podcast, we create a safe place where wounded leaders can share their stories, find community, and discover pathways toward healing and a renewed purpose. Each episode will bring honest conversations with those who have walked through the valley of ministerial suffering and emerged stronger on the other side. Whether you're currently serving in ministry, recovering from church trauma yourself, or simply want to better understand the challenges that are facing today's church leaders, this podcast is for you. It will offer biblical wisdom, practical strategies, and genuine hope. Now let's begin today's conversation. Welcome to Wounded Leadership Podcast, Stories from the Wounded. Folks, I am so excited about the guest today. I'm going to give a brief overview, and then I'm going to let you do a much better job at introducing yourself than I can introduce you. This is Tiffany Henning, who has quickly become a great friend in the ministry. She is the founder of somethingsgottachange.com, and I'm going to let you share about that at the end. But Tiffany's here to just tell her story about being wounded in ministry. So, Tiffany, introduce yourself. Tell us what you want us to know about who you are. And then we'll dive into the story.
I was about to say who I am or who I was. So that's always the question. Well, I
Both.
mean, you basically gave the synopsis of what I'm doing. My organization, Something's Gotta Change, is pretty much exactly what it says, which is, I know you really are focusing on the wounded, the weary, people who are in or have been in ministry, and that is definitely my heart as well. And I think that's why you and I connected initially and to become such good friends. It's just this common passion that we have to help churches and ministry do it better when it comes to the pastors and the staff. The chewing up and spitting out that happens sometimes
Yeah.
is just, it's not healthy. So I mean, to say the least.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's just the name of my organization. I have a history of picking really long names for organizations. I always thought I want to do a little pithy one. It never works, but I mean, what it is something's got to change. And basically the core of what it is there's a lot of resources out there. There's a lot of people ringing the same bell as you and I continue to stumble across them. And to try to bring all their ministries, all their support, all the resources together and put it in one place, one hub place. So it makes it easier for churches and ministries to find.
Yeah, 100%. Something does have to change because you and I, we come into contact with people every single day that have been wounded by this leadership position ministry. And we're talking about church ministry, parachurch, things of that nature. And the reason we care so much about it is because we've been through it.
Yes.
So let's go back. I've heard your story, but I want our listeners to hear your story of, you mentioned earlier, you want to know who I was or who I am now. That's the whole thing. That's the point.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go and let's dive into those weeds. Let's dive into the story about how you got to where you are today and why you're there. So where do you want to start? Start us at the beginning.
Yeah, I always joke around. I was born in Corpus Christi, Texas. So yes, no, definitely. Well, I think, to understand, my initial ministry experience, and then also because I've been through several situations that have wounding. And the thing that I've realized just in ministry over these last couple decades is that everyone has a story. I've only ever met one person that doesn't have a story, and their brother-in-law had a story. So I'm like, everyone has a story about seeing this happen in churches. So, I didn't become a believer until I almost graduated high school. So my senior year, I'd started going to youth group, and I think most people, I would say, have unless they were just kind of raised and when they were young they did it, but they have a moment when they accepted Christ or whatever. I never had that. Mine was really just, I was into partying and doing all the stuff. Then I started going to the youth group, and just several months later, the things that used to fill me up, I'll
Mhm.
use that term loosely, just like I remember I used to go to listen to these bands and stuff, and then I started like feeling just uncomfortable, like irritable, and
Yeah.
it was the spirit inside me reacting to the spirit of what was going on around me.
Yeah.
I definitely know that. I went to community college for a couple years, and then was after my third year, I was like, I need to have a better idea of what I'm going to do with my life. I had taken every single English class that community college had offered, so there was no more. And so I decided, well, maybe I should be an English major. I transferred to a Christian college, and I had been a Christian for a couple years. That is where I really learned um, what I believed,
Mhm.
and who I was and what I believed. So there's one pocket of just how I ever came to Christ, in that met my husband at the church that I was going to, and he was the junior high pastor,
Mm.
and I thought he was cute.
Well, if I would hope so.
I started helping out with the junior high, ministry and stuff, and the rest is kind of history. So
Yeah.
we got married for 12 plus years. We did youth ministry.
Mhm.
The church that him and I met at, there was a big issue with the pastor.
Mm.
And, he was having an affair, but it was secret, and he thought my
Mm.
husband knew. And so just was an ugly thing. And we ended up being kind of pushed out, lots of lies told, you know the drill. And
Mhm.
so, but we jumped directly into another ministry. We moved to a different state and jumped in with a church plant church that had been there for a couple years. And it was really neat because the church we'd been at before was just your conservative 90s church. you know, the pastor has to wear a tie and a suit,
Oof.
and
Yeah.
there was almost a split on whether we'd have drums or not. That kind of denomination and things. And so it was really neat to be a part of this. It was an organization called Vision Arizona,
Mm.
and they were planting churches in the early 2000s or late 90s in Arizona that was just exploding with growth. And so,
Wow.
so amazing. We loved the leadership. We got really close with the pastor and his family. It was fantastic. But as churches do sometimes, it doesn't necessarily work out. And so we
Uh,
had our second incident of just being let go. For at the time, we didn't see eye to eye about it. I think in retrospect, you can look back and go, okay, I can understand maybe why behind that.
yeah.
About several weeks after that, I think 5 or 6 weeks, our pastor actually had major health issues and had to step away. and
Wow.
and I do want to kind of caveat with it, because this was 20 years ago. God has brought a restoring relationship back with this family, with us,
Wow.
my husband and I, to the point of where just like 6 months ago, I went and stayed with them for many days for a conference that was in the
Mm.
area. And so I love how God can redeem and restore our hurt in
Yeah.
ways. So my husband and I, after second time's a charm, we're like, we love God, we don't like church, and we don't like church people, so peace out, we're
Yeah.
done. And that's where we stepped away from church for a couple years, came back
Mm.
to San Diego, which is where all our family lived, and decided to have a couple kids really quickly. So
There you go.
that's kind of where we were there.
Yeah. So it's interesting you talk about having that reconciliation because a lot of people don't see that and kind of, I don't know. So I don't know if they pray for that or if they pray for, more Old Testament prayers of Lord smite them. But how did that happen?
There are many different, I think, things for it. The pastor, after everything happened with him and the health issues and stuff like that, he ultimately went to kind of part-time serve. He went on disability, went to serve part-time in another church. They had an experience happen to them that was very similar as well. And this was many years down the road after the reconciliation was already, there. But I remember, I think it was about 3 years after we had left, and we still went back to Arizona to visit friends and stuff like that.
Mm.
There was a voice message because we were still in contact with his youngest daughter that I
Mm.
was close with, and there was a voice message he left us saying, "Hey, I don't know if you'd be interested in getting together, but I really would like to." And and I remember my husband and I listening to it and kind of looking at each other and realizing, we're not really holding on to that grudge and hurt anymore. And so
Wow.
we met with him and his wife, and that was kind of the beginning of the restoration. I think it definitely was God working in his heart
Mhm.
when it comes to that, and then I think God also working in ours. We never thought about doing it, we never thought about praying for it or anything like that. It happened.
Mm.
I understand there's not always restoration in that, but God blessed us in that,
Yeah.
and, I think it's just testament to God not wasting any
Mm.
hurt and always utilizing it some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, and I want to point out, and I've similar for me of all the years that I've been in ministry and the hurts that I've been through. I've only had one time somebody actually come back and say I'm sorry. But you mentioned something really important that you said you let go of that hurt before you realized you had to let go of the hurt already. And I think that's the first step. Whether it's actual reconciliation, that's the first step of just letting it go within yourself, between you and the Lord. Was that how hard was that? Or just all of a sudden you just realized, wait, we're actually not affected by this anymore?
It really was an all of a sudden thing because
Mm.
before we had left that ministry, we had almost closed the door on having kids. Because when you're in youth ministry, you have your kid, you have other people's kids at your house 24/7, and so the
Yeah.
thought of having our own children was like, and so when we came home, and then that's why we were at the cutoff point where we're like, bam, bam, we better have these
It's
kids
either
quick.
now or never.
I think being parents gave us different perspectives and a different focus. And at that point, it had been about 2 years or 2 years before God started bringing us back to the church. God started burning our hearts to come back to church. And so we had found a church
Mm.
to go to that really started, I think, to heal that piece. It felt very healthy in a lot of ways. And because of that, and I think other things, I think we were at the point where we're like, we're like, okay, because this pastor was not, it was a hard thing for him to do. In
Mm.
retrospective, we knew, and it wasn't him being evil in specific ways versus the previous one who was sleeping around the church.
Yeah.
It just was, I think, a different alignment of what importance should be
Mhm.
and a shift in that. And so I think we don't give enough credence to that in ministry. Sometimes I think God tells us to leave and we don't listen. And
Yeah, I get
sometimes,
that.
I think he's like, well, you didn't do it the easy way, so we're going to have to do it the hard way. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but even in that, there could be the right way of discovering, hey, there's a difference of opinion or difference of direction of
True,
vision, but there's a
true.
right way to separate here, not with animosity or that causes hurt.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think that was the biggest time because we had moved to Arizona specifically for this church. So all of our friends, all of our social life was in this church.
Mhm.
And we had actually stayed in Arizona for additional year after we left the church. And I have to say it was actually the best year of our marriage because
Really?
we didn't have anything else but each other. And so,
I
we moved into this tiny apartment and everything, but I think sometimes you get so busy again doing the ministry of God that you forget to actually have a relationship with God. So, and others.
yeah. So you find yourself back in the church, but you move to San Diego. You kind of have these 2 years change, different careers, different identity, pick up from there. Like what
I was doing HR and
Mhm.
corporate with a organization, and so, I was working there for about 4 or 5 years, I think, and,
I love technology. I'm gonna be able to cut this out. That's great.
no, that's fine. Ask me the question again, and,
I can cut that part out. I love it. Keep your hands still. Don't touch things. Thankfully, you can edit videos,
yes,
and it
it is
happened
great.
in this video and not with somebody else because it's a
Yes.
lot less embarrassing. What was the question? Okay, take 2. Okay, you're back into you're in California, new careers of, you're out, you kind of reset, you have your family. What takes place next?
So at that point, I was working with a friend's organization that did payrolling and staffing. So I had done HR for several years in the corporate world. One of the leaders at the church knew what I did because I was working in the new believers ministry. So they knew what I did. And then a role came up open for HR/executive assistant for the executive pastor at the church.
Uh-huh.
And they sent me this job description, emailed me, said, hey, didn't know if you'd be interested, but I think you might be good. Would you be open to applying this? And I remember I was at home because I was working remotely back in the day when remote wasn't
Before
a
remote
thing.
was cool.
Yes. Yes. And so I opened the email and I'm in a room by myself and I read it and I just did a scoff and I said, hell no, am I ever going to work for a church again? I said that out loud. And every time I tell people a story, I tell them, hell no, am I ever going
I
to
did.
work for a church again?
Yeah,
But I told them,
you get to that point where you're just like, I'm done.
no, you're like, I'm not, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me.
For
So
sure.
that's
Yeah.
kind of where we were.
Hmm.
And, but I told them I'd pray about it. And I'm like, oh, they're a pastor. I gotta like pray. And that's how I prayed too. It was just like, God, okay, whatever. I know you don't want me to do this, but just in case.
Yeah.
And I kid you not, in the matter of 48 hours, God turned my hell no into a this is exactly where he wants me to be. There's
That's a
probably only like 2 or 3 times in my life where I felt him leading me by the nose into something. Usually we realize it 2020. We're like, oh
uh,
yeah, God totally had his hand over that. But at the time I knew he was leading me into this job.
wow.
So I worked there for almost 8 years
Uh,
and it was a really great church in a lot of ways. They really liked building up leaders and they really were into coaching other churches. They were a
uh,
multi-site. They were opening a lot of other stuff. And it was really great in so many ways.
uh,
But the underlying culture, I realized, retrospectively was extremely toxic.
uh,
One example of it is, they would always be like, oh, yeah, we're very into vacation. And the moment people get back from their last vacation, we tell them they need to go schedule their next vacation on the books. So this is a flag they always raised of this, yes.
yeah. Look how
And
good we are.
yeah, but then the underlying culture was if you are gone more than like 5 days, your ministry is going to be completely rearranged by the time you get back, or they will make some crucial decisions because they had a tendency to wait, not make decisions. And then all of a sudden they would just pull the trigger and just make a decision and just go with it without always having the key stakeholders in the room.
Uh,
And so yeah, there was a lot of just kind of toxic things.
yeah.
Also in the it was interesting because I got to see the shoe on the other foot. I got to see why organizations wanted to get rid of, pastors or certain
Mm.
leaders and stuff like that. So it gave me a different perspective that it's not always what needs to happen that's the problem, it's the how it happens.
Oh, 100%.
And
Yeah.
so that kind of became my soapbox after that. Um realizing that not all churches are evil. It's most churches are not evil. Caveat that. It's just, they do things wonky sometimes. Sometimes
Uh,
they're so afraid to be corporate and they feel like they need to be nice all the time. They'll be nice, 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 not tell the truth about things until all of a sudden they can't be nice anymore and have to go, okay, goodbye.
yeah, I think there's some things we're so afraid to be business like that we
Yes.
don't take good business principles and use them. Like, no, we're the church. Well, the problem is
Yeah.
on the other side of that, then when we do make leadership decisions or different things like that, then we do it incorrectly.
Yeah.
So we're finding error on both sides.
No, and there's definitely, like I said, the way we do it, because aside from corporations, when people leave a church, they're leaving usually their village. They're leaving their support system. They're
Mhm.
leaving all of that. And then a lot of times it's also the spouses and the kids that
Mhm.
get even shorter in the stick because they weren't in the meetings. They didn't
Uh-huh.
see anything. And all they know is what has been told to them by,
Mhm.
their spouse. And so it gets hurtful and mangly and definitely lonely.
Yeah, when they and not only are they losing all of the, I guess, earthly structures that they rely on, they're also losing their spiritual structure. Now, I'm not saying
Yeah.
they're losing their faith or losing their salvation or anything like that, but they're losing that community of spiritual support as well.
Yeah.
So it's a
No,
total loss.
I got to a point where I was walking when my husband and I were looking for churches after God had kind of led us to go back. I found that for a lot of churches we're visiting, I would like watch the pastor, whoever's speaking, and I would sit there and go, wonder what dark secret they're hiding. And so
Yeah.
there definitely was a lot of healing and trust that needed to happen, for me. And
Mhm.
going from there, God had called me out in 2014. He gave me this vision for a ministry to help churches do it better, to help
Yeah.
churches just kind of, be able to incorporate the good things about corporate and to handle their staff issues better.
Uh-huh.
And I'd started a nonprofit ministry that I launched in 2016, and it's called HR Ministry Solutions, and it really focused on corporate and not corporate, HR compliance and
Uh-huh.
just helping churches do better in that. But early 2024, trying to remember
Uh-huh.
what year we're in. Early 2024, I stepped away from that and really, put my all into something's got to change because really this was always my soapbox,
Yeah.
helping people who had been hurt get to a point where they're restored and then helping churches not do it so much.
My next question is always a loaded one. Um, so I'm gonna warn you ahead of time.
All right.
Yeah, how did you go through the healing process and how do you know if you're healed? That's a loaded question.
It is. And here is the thing. I feel like the healing process is a very long process. And I don't know that it always ends
Mhm.
because I feel like again, I'm not a counselor. I haven't had all this, but just years of reading and seeing it is trauma. It
Mhm.
is PTSD. It is trauma. And like childhood trauma,
Mhm.
there are things that are going to trigger you sometimes, no matter how much work you have done. So I think first and foremost, it's, you have to rely on God. You have to keep your relationship with God where, just to be with him. But the other piece is, you have to get counseling with someone who understands ministry and
Mhm.
understands this piece. And I was very grateful to have a counselor that been there, done that, and had lots of pastors in the past that
Uh,
she worked with that really kind of helped me. The problem was that I thought I was healed at one point. When things were going good, I was like, okay, great, I'm healed. But then the moment something else happened, I was triggered and I just was right back into that pit.
yeah.
So I think the thing with counseling and stuff like that, or even processing through stuff, is when we stop seeing and feeling the yuckiness, then we go, okay, we're healed. But it's like a broken bone or something.
Uh,
Okay, it can look good on the outside and the bone can look good, but it's never going to be the same. And guess what? You're probably more likely to break that bone easier in the future.
mm,
And so I think sometimes we end counseling too soon because, like, I had my counselor say, when things are going bad, you're in counseling all the time. But then things start going good and you're like, oh, I don't need counseling. But that's really when you need to then take the shovel and start diving under the surface to deal with those deeper things that are more embedded in you that will trigger you more. And I think that is probably the piece of advice that I would have is don't stop once you feel like things are better. You've got
mm.
to take a shovel to it. You got to open up that closet you've hit
Oof.
all the
Ye
skeletons in and that you've repressed and covered with chocolate and or Netflix, and you've got to do the work. In fact, there was a great book. I don't even know where. Oh, right there. It's called How to Do the Work that one of my
Mm.
counselor gave me, and it really was because it is work. It is
Oh,
work, and it's like I don't want to regurgitate those ugly feelings, but it's like cleaning out a closet. In order to organize my closet, I had to pull everything out first and then sift through it all, organize it all before I can put it back in neatly
mm.
and organized. And it's the same thing, I think, with processing our trauma, our PTSD, our hurt, our weariness, our woundedness when it comes to working in ministry.
How did you process all of that? What did it take to process all of those things and get to the point where you felt excited about a ministry again?
That's a really good question, and I'm going to give you the textbook answer, which is God. Really,
Yeah, for
because
sure.
I thinking about working at or with a church again after everything was just like it made me tired and I
Mhm.
wanted to just not even think about it, not even whatever. I just wanted to run away. That's a
Yeah.
key thing. I wanted to run away. I think, and I've seen from a lot of people who've been through the wounding process, I feel like a lot of times they will go get a job in the secular world, either temporary or part or permanently,
Mhm.
but I feel like sometimes that is needed to get perspective. So when it comes to the processing, there's no real answer to that. You have to have a counselor who knows how to dig the layers.
Mhm.
And like I said, you need to understand the layers. I think also understanding um and I think using this term feels to some people, there definitely is spiritual abuse that goes on in church.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of pride and narcissism that
Mhm.
really is, especially in upper leadership. Not
Mhm.
always, but there is, and there's an enemy who wants to get a foothold. And so even if there wasn't pride and narcissism to begin with, I guarantee the enemy, the two different ways, the pride and narcissism or sexual immorality. Those are the
Mhm.
two ways one and two, that he gets his foothold in the church. And so I think it's important for us to be able to, through counseling, through other stuff, we need to understand and be able to look at it correctly.
Yeah.
And so that when you say, how did you really process it? I think it was my counselor and God and everything looking through it, taking it, being able to hold it a bit away from me, got big fingers, and just be able to look at it all language and go, okay, this wasn't my fault. This is,
Mhm.
I could have done this better and I could have done that better. And this is where my pride got in the way or whatever. But
Mhm.
this wasn't my fault. I'm not a bad person. I'm not an evil person. I'm not a lazy person. I'm not,
Mhm.
and one of the other things is I think reaffirming your call to ministry, because a lot of times you start to go, well, if God let that happen, was I even called to ministry to begin with? So
How do you do that? I mean, because everybody I talk to that I hear their story to a person questions their call. Like, maybe I missed something. How do you push through that?
I'm also going to say something else that may not be popular for some people who roll their eyes and go, I know that. I preach that all the time. Journaling.
Mhm.
Honestly, writing it down, because I find when I'm doing my devotions sometimes, and some days I'm really close to God. Some days I feel like my prayers are just hitting the ceiling. I think we all have that.
Yeah.
But to be able to journal and to have, like, I love that my counselor does this too. She'll tell me, okay, what is it that's making you feel, anxiety? What is triggering you? And she's like, I want you to close your eyes and I want you to ask God right now. And
Mm.
every time she does that, and I've just been quiet and asked it, something will pop into my mind. And then the more I start to look at that, the more I go, yes, that is it. So I find when I am doing my morning devotions and things like that, when things pop into my mind, I don't get annoyed that they're like, ugh, that's just an interruption of whatever I'm doing. I write it down in a little corner,
Yeah.
and a lot of times it's God speaking something to me.
Mm.
Um, in fact, probably about 6 months ago, I felt God say to me, I know what you've gone through is hurting. It still hurts, you know, but I'm calling you to this,
Mm.
and you need to be obedient regardless of whether you have to go through the junk or not. And I
Wow.
just felt him say that. I mean, it really was just a pop thought in my head, but whenever something pops in my head that doesn't really jive with how I am, I go, it's got to be from God.
Hold on, that's not from me, so I gotta see where'd that
But
come from.
see, journaling though, writing it down,
Yeah.
it solidifies in my mind, and then when I see it in writing, I feel God kind of working through it and processing through it, but everyone processes differently. That's the thing we need to know. How I process isn't how everybody else processes.
Mhm.
There's some times that I will have a conversation with God in my head that this sounds weird. And again, it's only retrospective that I go, yes, that's totally God. Sometimes
Yeah.
I'll just be sitting there and I'll ask a question and then an answer will pop into my mind. And so I just started writing that down. And,
Uh-huh.
God, did you really want me to do this? Yes. Was that really you that just said yes? Yes. But it hurts so much. I know it hurts, but it's also where you grow. I mean, it'll be things like that I'll have this whole conversation afterwards. I'll look at it and read through it and go, "Oh my gosh, that really was a conversation with God."
Yeah.
Like it in the moment I'm like, is this just me popping into my head or whatever? But being able to write it down and then see it and ponder it and then going back to it later. This is how
Mm.
I say about the calling, going back to it later. You have to be able to go back to that moment. And Satan's going to want us to doubt
Mhm.
at all whatsoever. You just have to, it's like Candyland, you got to go back to the beginning, but you just need to re-clarify what God had said to you. And I think if you have it written down, it's not as easy for Satan to go, did God
Yeah,
really
but
say
did that
that?
really happen? Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, I love that. It's all about getting it outside of yourself
Mhm.
and putting it on paper because that confronts you with it. But I love having the conversation on paper and then testing the conversation on paper
Yes.
and then clarifying the conversation on paper and
Yes.
then going back to it, going, maybe I'm not going crazy. This actually happened,
Yeah.
because we tend to either suppress or distract. And when we write it down, we can't do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Now,
Yeah.
let me tell you one other thing that I think is applicable to this. So I had shared with you that I didn't have a specific moment where I got saved or whatever. It was more over a course of many months that I noticed this difference.
Hmm.
When I started going to the Christian college 2 years after I got saved, I was interviewing for a position to help with. It had a elementary school attached to it, so help with some after school care. And the principal had asked me, "Okay, tell us about your experience of accepting Christ." And I told her, and I remember clearly she said, "You know what? I do not doubt for 1 second that you were saved there, but Satan will get a foothold and Satan will try to convince you that you never made that decision." She
Mm,
said, "I encourage you today even just to sit down and just, have that conversation with God and claim today as the day that you accepted Christ so that you have a date so that when
mm,
Satan gets into your head, you can go, no, this was the date that I went down that I accepted it." And
mm,
I mean, I still remember that date, September 1st, 1993. Yes, I am that old. So I still remember that date very clearly, very perfectly. And so I think it's the same with our callings. I think
mhm.
it's the same with different things. And one last thing, I
Yeah.
think we need to hold our calling with a loose hand
Mm,
because I think when God calls us to stuff or calls us to an organization or calls us to a position, sometimes we hold it so tightly that we're not allowing God to shift us where he needs us in the next season.
yeah.
There is natural prunings, there is natural endings that's going to happen with organizations because they change or our focuses change, and we
Mhm.
need to normalize this,
Yeah.
I think, in ministry. But instead we hold it so tight and like, this is where I'm meant to be, but
Yeah.
we stop listening when God says you were meant to be there, but now in this new season, this is where I want you to go.
And I would even add to that, separate your calling and your identity. They're not the same
Yes.
thing.
Yes, very true, very true.
I want to point something out. I love how some advice you got early on obviously the sovereignty of God knew what you were going to walk through. Some advice you got early on simply about solidifying your salvation
Mhm.
and or your view of salvation when it happened. God brought that back in your healing journey of do the same thing over here.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's hope in that God was preparing you and you didn't even know it.
It is so amazing because I look at the last 20 years of my life, and there probably was 4 or 5 times when I was in the pit. I was broken. I was crying out to God. I
Mhm.
struggled with depression, anxiety, everything underneath the sun. And I was just, why, God? Why am I doing this? Why am I going through this? Wouldn't it be more effective if I didn't have to deal with this and I can, just minister to you and doing all these things? And there was
Yeah.
2 things that God taught me. Number one of the verses I memorized, and of course I'm going to misquote it. I think it's 2 Corinthians 12:9, where it talks about, you know, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, for when I
Mm,
am weak, then I'm strong, and it's all about God using those weaknesses.
yeah.
But in the same mode, I look back over everything I went through. And because of what I went through, I started a nonprofit that still exists that helps churches with HR and helps them do things better with ministry. And because I went through this, I have a passion for what I'm doing now that helps ministers as well get the help they need when they are weary or wounded or
Yeah.
just broken. And so it's, would I wanted to go through that if given the choice? No.
Absolutely not.
But I would not give up for anything the ministries that God has used me in, as well as the level of understanding He
Uh,
has taken me, just even in the last year, has been a big thing. So,
well, it's
yeah,
God growing you in the kingdom understanding of it all to where you cannot hate the organization or the individual place that pushed you out,
yeah.
and you can still pray for their ministry.
Oh,
That
absolutely.
is so hard
Absolutely.
to do. That is so hard to do because
It
you want to
is.
pray the Old Testament prayer of Lord, may the ground open up and swallow them whole.
Yes.
You can't do that, but yeah, just where you can say, Lord, actually, I knew it cost me being pulled out of there, pushed out of there, all the hurt, but the ministry is still there and still having a kingdom mindset as far as that goes.
I think there's enormous healing in praying for those who hurt you. And
Mhm.
trust me, I know that is begrudgingly, that
With
even when you
gritted
don't
teeth.
want to, like I prayed about the working at the church, but I found the more I prayed for them, the softer my heart got. I
Wow.
started to get Christ's heart for other people.
Mhm.
And, you know, one example of that is Corrie ten Boom. If people don't know, she was in the concentration camps during World War II. Her father died, her sister died,
Yeah.
just experienced horrible things, but she wrote books afterwards, did a lot of speaking, and I think, 30 plus years after this, or maybe even more, at one of the places she was speaking at, there was a guy there who actually was one of her guards at the camp.
Wow.
And she ended up, and he asked for forgiveness, and she's like, I already forgave you. And they hugged and cried and just everything, because I think God had already softened her heart to the point of realizing it doesn't matter what that person did or who they are or
Mhm.
even them not being repentant. That has nothing to do with me being able to pray for them and God
Wow.
making my heart like His to be able to see them through His eyes. And it's hard because as humans, we just want to, yeah, open the earth and swallow them whole, Lord.
Wow, that is so good. Yeah, every time I do one of these, there's always one statement that I just, fight against. Just I got to sit back and just marinate on that one and
Hmm.
just let that one rest a minute. So, final question, bringing it back full circle. Your ministry is somethingsgottachange.com. I want everybody to go to that website, share that website, make this website blow up. It's so full of resources and things for pastors. It is really a switchboard for help for the wounded. What's got to change? Your website is something's got to change. Sound bite here. What's got to change personally and what needs to change corporately?
I'm not going to share what needs to change in personal life, so we'll just slide over
Skip
that
that
one.
question.
But, I think, and it's interesting because I say with my ministry, I feel like God has given me a vision for 2 phases. The
Yeah.
first phase is what I'm doing, creating this hub, and it is a work in progress. There's so much
Oh,
out
for
there
sure.
I didn't even realize was out there. So it is always a work in progress.
Yeah.
So that's phase 1. Phase 2 is really, kind of helping people and churches to do it better. Because here's the thing, and my dad always says, it takes 2 to tango. And I was like,
I hate
with
that.
that, you know, and
Yeah.
there is always, at the very least, 1% that is your fault. There, at the
Oh,
very
for
least,
sure.
there's 1%. But I have really found that communication is when it breaks down, that's where
Mhm.
the problems happen. And I think changing our mindset about conflict.
Oh,
I
yeah.
think we need to have conflict. I think we need to normalize healthy conflict. We need to learn how to have conflict in a healthy way, because if we do, then the way we do things will not end up so crashed and burned. I think as
Mhm.
people who are working in ministry, the thing needs to change is we need to have boundaries, and we
Mhm.
need to stop sliding. And I say sliding because it's a slow step into,
The
we need to
slow
stop
fade.
sliding from worshiping God and having
Mhm.
a relationship with God, to seeing our ministry for God. Working for
Mhm.
God is not the same as having a relationship with God. And sometimes, we get that mixed. We check our phones and our emails, all hours of the day, because someone may be hurting. And when we go on vacation, we never have downtime.
Yeah.
And honestly, I don't think most pastors or people in ministry take their Sabbath
Mm-mm.
in any way, shape, or form. And so I think normalizing, and I think since COVID, it's gotten better, but
Mhm.
normalizing the ebb and flow of ministry, and that as people working in ministry, no one else is going to protect us the way we're going to protect us. We need to
Mhm.
set boundaries, and we need to make sure that we are taking care of ourselves first and foremost. And then the other
Absolutely.
thing is churches need to, I think, do a lot more. I think having an outside eye come in and look at your organization every once in a while
Mhm.
is extremely healthy, because we get blinded with the way that we're doing things. To have someone come in and have those conversations with our staff, because there's the culture we say we have, but then there's
Mm.
also the culture that we really have underneath the surface. And sometimes we
Yeah.
don't realize that,
We need secret shoppers for churches. That's gonna date me
Absolutely.
again. That's gonna date me now. We need the secret shopper
Absolutely.
program for churches.
I am going to push. If I have it here, I don't have it here. So I'm going to push actually a book that I think every church should read, and even every pastor should read. It's by Henry Cloud, Boundaries. If you don't know him, the whole Boundaries book,
Yeah,
which definitely that alone is
is a good
good.
one.
And they have one that's like Boundaries and Conflict and Conversations. But there's one called Necessary Endings. This is a fantastic book, because
Mm.
it really talks about how sometimes we need to have necessary endings with people who work for us. And then
Mm.
sometimes, as people who are doing the ministry, we need to have necessary endings with the place that we work at. We don't see the signs to begin with. We keep banging our head against the wall, but feeling like we're being faithful and stuff. And sometimes we need to take a step back, like I said, hold our calling and our job loosely,
Mm.
and go, do I need to pivot?
Yeah.
Can we do this? And have those conversations early on. So I'm going to
Yeah.
give you another example.
Go for it.
One part of the reason with the organization in Arizona, the second church that we
Mhm.
work with that was a church plant, they were very focused on the spiritual health, the spiritual health, the spiritual health. Well, they started to explode in growth.
Mhm.
And so the last 2 years we were there, they had doubled the numbers and everything like that. And the focus became, or at least felt from our end, a little bit, it kind of pivoted. So it was a little bit more focused on numbers.
Mhm.
And my husband, who is a youth pastor, and me as well, were very into, hey, let's not just do wide. Let's do deep.
Yeah, you're
Let's
seeing
bring
the
the deep. We're not looking for numbers, or you can be a charismatic person from the stage, but if you don't bring them down deep, then really it's just a surface level nothing.
yeah.
And so, my husband is loyal to a fault. He will stay there and try to work things out to a fault.
Uh-huh.
About a year before we left, I kind of felt God's nudging a little bit, but again, we weren't obedient.
Um,
So the church just started to have a different focus. And that was one of the things, is that they felt like our youth ministry hadn't grown in the 2 years. And numbers wise, it hadn't, but the type of kids that were coming and the spiritual depth of them had totally changed.
uh,
But again, the church had changed its focus a little bit. Good, bad, ugly, no judging on them, but that wasn't our focus.
uh-huh.
And so all of a sudden, what was aligned is no longer aligned. And the moment that that started being noticeable, which was 2 years before, there should have been some really deep conversations about it. And we
Communicate
could
early.
have, yeah, we could have been like, the moment you start feeling like you're doing a lot of things that don't really align with me, we need to be okay in having those conversations and
Mhm.
going, hey, and then for churches to hear those conversations and not immediately let the person go. I think sometimes
Yeah.
people are like, I tried to have a conversation about it and they're like, oh, okay, so you're going to start looking for another job. Well, we're just going to give you your 2 weeks right now. So,
Oh, for sure. Yeah, there's so many different ways we can learn to do better about let's let's identify problems when they're lowercase p
yes.
before we ignore them into their uppercase p, and then we react instead of be proactive or have a plan or just sit down and be benevolent with each other and go, hey, we can still love each other and have a
Absolutely.
separation of ministry and separate well. These conversations always leave a ton more questions and a ton more places that we can go, but we're slowly running out of time. So, Tiffany, thank you for being here and
That's why you have
sharing
to
your
do a
story.
part two.
Every definitely we're going to have you on for a part 2 to explore this even more because there's just a lot more. In fact, if you're listening to this podcast, put in the comments some questions or thoughts that you have, and maybe we'll go back and do a part 2 of raising some of those questions as well. If you're a wounded pastor or a wounded leader, wounded ministry, you know who you are, or like you was said earlier, you know somebody that is. Either
Mhm.
you're wounded, your family member is wounded, or your friend is wounded. So I want you to go to somethingsgottachange.com. Check all that out. I also want you to go to woundedleadership.com. You'll find some resources there. I'm throwing a lot of websites at you. We're going to put these in the show notes and the links. The pastorscompass.com is just an online community for you to have a voice, share your story. There's a lot of resources on there as well. Also on woundedleadership.com. If this really resonates with you and you want to find healing in telling your story, there's a tab there called Tell Your Story. Fill that form out. Someone from woundedleadership.com will call you and we'll explore that as well. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Do all the things like, share, rate highly so that other wounded pastors can find it. Tiffany, you're a great friend. Thank you for telling your story. We're going to have you back. This has been Wounded Leadership Stories from the Wounded. Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us on another episode of the Wounded Leadership Podcast, Stories from the Wounded. We hope today's conversation has given you valuable insight into how vulnerability and resilience work to shape truly authentic leadership. Remember, our wounds don't define us. Every scar tells a story of survival, and every setback creates an opportunity for extraordinary growth. If today's episode resonated with you, please visit us at woundedleadership.com, where you're going to find resources, community forums, opportunities to share your own leadership journey. I also invite you to subscribe, rate, review this podcast on your favorite platform. Your support helps us to reach more leaders who might be struggling in silence. Till next time, this is Dr. Matthew Tanner reminding you that your wounds can become your greatest source of wisdom, connection, and strength. It's the Wounded Leadership Podcast, transforming wounds into wisdom, one story at a time.